SC Media and our sponsors, Savient, Liminal, and CyberArk are proud to present this month's CISO Stories program. Hosted by yours truly, Jessica Hoffman, this is the show where CISOs share tales from the trenches and unpack leadership lessons learned along the way. Find this month's CISO Stories content at CISOstoriespodcast.com. The Cyber Risk Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CRC. Greetings. Welcome everybody for another week episode of CISO Stories Podcast. We got Tammy Klotz with us today, mover and shaker in the Philly tech scene, cyber scene. I'm so excited to have you on, Tammy. Thank you. How you doing?
I'm good, Jess. Happy to be here. Looking forward to our conversation today, and I'm sure it'll be a great one.
It will. It's always a pleasure to see you. And yes, shout out to FutureCon, Kim, and changed my life. That's where I met Tammy, which we just put the dots together, but I was speaking on emotional intelligence and cybersecurity, especially from a leadership perspective. And that was the same month in April of this year when Tammy published her first book. Is it your first book?
That's my first one, yeah. Mm-hmm.
First book, Leading with Empathy and Grace. That sounds very graceful.
It's in the background.
There it is.
Yeah,
I love it.
So, I released the book in April of 2024. So it's been one of my things on my bucket list was to write a book, and it's really filled with leadership stories, with things that have worked for me during the course of my career that are somewhat tips and tricks of how to lead with empathy and grace, hence the title, and really focused on maybe some, atypical or not usual techniques that are used. People often refer to them as soft skills. That's a bad word as far as I'm concerned. They're critical skills and need to be used and practiced by anybody in a leadership role. So the book is not academic. It is not checklist. It's really conversational and full of stories.
I love it. And people be trying my patience. So that grace, sometimes there's not enough grace in the world. But make sure you check out Tammy's book, Leading with Empathy and Grace. So today we're talking about identity security. And Tammy, you've been in the manufacturing industry for quite some time in your career. Your whole bio is just amazing. I'm not going to read it all, but you up there, girl. You're making big bucks, leading with big bucks, having a big budget, all that good stuff. So I'm not really familiar with manufacturing and OT. I wish I was more, because I feel like that's so exciting. And there are a lot of differences, though, from what I do know between like OT security and what traditional security or whatever you want to call it. That we typically think of when we're talking about a cybersecurity program for an organization. So some of the things we talked about in our prep session was the differences between identity security for knowledge workers versus frontline workers. Let's talk about that. First of all, can you define those for folks that aren't in the manufacturing industry?
Yeah, so let's just step back maybe a little bit more, Jess, and talk about, the differences at the highest level between IT and OT, because so many times the IT folks, the enterprise folks, want to force fit everything that they do in the enterprise into the OT space, the operational technology space, and it doesn't really work that way, right? And it really boils down to one fundamental difference, is that in the manufacturing space, the CIA triangle that we speak of in traditional security kind of gets flipped on its head, right? So for the OT, the manufacturing side of the business, it's always availability is first, not confidentiality, because the plant needs to be up and running. It's making product. It's part of, the supply chain, most likely for other customers or your end product in that life cycle. So the focus is extremely different. So you don't talk about automated patching in the OT space. That's not how it gets done, right? You talk about plan patching as part of outage windows that the plant is taking from a downtime perspective. And it just needs to be managed and handled very differently. So when you think about the differences between the types of workers that you were alluding to with knowledge workers versus frontline workers or shop floor workers, managers, those are the folks whose their primary job and responsibility is not sitting in front of a computer all day, every day, like you and I do, right? These are folks that are working in a manufacturing facility who are, overseeing process automation type activities. They're controlling critical systems that are used to combine chemicals, as a lot of times in my history has been being in chemical manufacturing. What are the recipes? What are the ingredients that need to be blended together to make a final product that in some cases can be hazardous, can be, things that are of interest to terrorism type organizations. So we definitely need to protect those assets a lot and very carefully.
One of our sponsors for this episode is Savient, a leading provider of identity security. Global enterprises rely on Savient's Identity Cloud for unparalleled visibility and control over every human and machine identity, so they can better secure their organization's business processes, enable digital operations, and empower everyone who works for them and with them with right time, right level access to the digital technologies and tools they need. Please visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/Savient to learn more and get a free demo.
So, what we're trying to do is really think about what is the roles from a security perspective that those folks need specifically to do their job. And this kind of transcends into the enterprise space as well, but I think the repercussions are different in the manufacturing space, right? So, because if somebody gets into a system that is unauthorized and has the ability to change a recipe, for example, the results could definitely be all the way up to loss of life, depending upon what happens. Now, in manufacturing as well, it's also extremely important that your safety and your security organizations are working together as well, right? Because in the event that there is a misconfiguration or a value that has been changed, ideally those systems are set up in a fail-safe mode so you don't find yourself in a hazardous situation or condition. So we try to marry and partner a lot of the messaging between the two organizations together. See something, say something, right? Stop, think, act. Those are things that you and I know from an enterprise perspective, but those definitely resonate within the manufacturing organization as well from a safety perspective as well to prevent incidents from happening like that. So back to your point on identity, a lot of times, people who are working on the shop floor will be frustrated by enterprise controls like multi-factor authentication, like having to change my password on a regular basis, because that's not their primary job, or they're not using a traditional endpoint like you and I are used to from a laptop perspective. They may be out on the floor using a barcode scanner. They may be printing to, shipping labels to a zebra printer that is in the shop floor that requires special permissions to get to and access, etc. So you need to think of kind of creatively around how do you maintain the controls that individuals are who they say they are when attempting to access those systems. So, and in some cases, depending upon the type of industry you're in, it could be extremely dirty. It could be extremely, heat sensitive, given, how the machinery is running. So a lot of times, things like mobile devices may not even be allowed in that environment. So how am I going to get an MFA prompt to somebody who is in a situation that is not conducive to a Wi-Fi signal being able to get sent through on a data network? So there's all sorts of different things that we need to think about. So alternatives are, what's very attractive as technology is evolving in the identification, the biometric space is how do I use different types of authentication mechanisms, right? Things like YubiKeys, things like other tokens. We saw last week the Ring capability, not the doorbell, but something that you wear on your hand, right? So that, that is much more amenable to somebody who is on the shop floor, who doesn't have to interface with their PC to reset their password or to be prompted for MFA, but there's another mechanism to allow that to actually happen.
CyberArk is the global leader in identity security. Centered on intelligent privilege controls, CyberArk provides the most comprehensive security offering for any identity, human or machine, across business applications, distributed workforces, hybrid cloud environments, and throughout the DevOps lifecycle. The world's leading organizations trust CyberArk to help secure their most critical assets. Please visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CyberArk to learn more about them. So it sounds like there's a healthy mix between physical identity security that needs to happen and also the logical. So
sure.
Yeah, those Ring guys just emailed me too.
Me too.
They're making their round. I mentioned this in a prior show too. Like, I feel like physical security. Now, this is totally different, right? Because, like you said, this could quite literally be loss of life if there was some kind of hazardous material or something goes wrong. And we've seen water companies getting breached. I believe the one, it was actually a water plant in Florida like a couple years ago. Yeah, that they messed with the treatment of the water. So like, talk about like critical to our well-being and our survival as a species. We need water. So as far as like the physical, you mentioned you got to think out the box, especially with not being able to use phones, typical cell phones for MFA. Do you see like it's usually like the typical, MFA passwords, using badges? Like, is there anything that you think that you see that from a manufacturing for physical security and identity security that is different than a typical maybe data center, or is it pretty much the same?
No, I think there's definitely some difference, specifically from like a regulatory perspective. My last company that I worked in was in the energy sector, right? And those organizations are oftentimes regulated by NERC and NERC CIP. So there's a whole set of different controls that are required, and it starts with physical security, right? So where is the equipment located that is controlling the process control systems, the distributed control systems, the DCSs, the HMIs, etc.? Where is all of that information or hardware actually housed? Who has access to it? Is it locked? How is it maintained? Does it have a UPS supply? So all of that is pertaining to, the accessibility to that information or that hardware, and then also the redundancy and the availability of that equipment. So when you think of things from a manufacturing perspective for critical infrastructure organization, physical security is the first line of defense, right? Even down to how am I getting access to the facility itself, right? I have a crazy story, and I won't name any companies, but I was going to one of our plants, hopped in an Uber car, and, the guy says, "Are you going to so-and-so?" And I was like, "Yep." And he's like, "Well, it's a good thing I'm taking you. I used to work there. Otherwise, nobody would know where it is." Because a lot of times these are kind of, not in high profile city locations, right? And I was like, "Oh, well, that's good." And then literally we got to the gate and he was like, "Oh, I wonder if my fob still works." And I was like, "Oh, no. Are you serious?" And, it did, which is a whole nother story. So, but that, that was a free pen test, if you will, totally accidental at that point in time. But physical security becomes so important in the manufacturing space. And much like, yes, all of the telco closets need to be protected and need to be locked. But, when you think about what individuals can do if they can get access to those systems and the ability to, phone home to, other locations where they can basically gain control of those systems that are operating the plant, the impact can be detrimental. And it's interesting that you brought up the Oldsmar example, because that was February 5th of 2021. And the reason I know that is that was the day that I kicked off my cybersecurity program at Covanta. And we were going through, I had just had my kickoff meeting with the executive team, came back to my desk, and, it's all over the news about Oldsmar. And Oldsmar happened to be like 10 minutes down the road from one of our plants. So it was timely, and the whole never let a good crisis go to waste. It was like, hey, this is happening to our neighbor. They didn't have the right controls, but an operator saw it and was able to stop it. Because in essence, had that operator not seen that, the contaminant, the lye amount in the water supply would have gone to a level that would have poisoned the entire community. And it was Super Bowl weekend in Tampa Bay. And so, the impact would have been crazy from that perspective, right? So it's good to use those examples to drive home why a lot of this stuff is important.
Absolutely. We do the same thing. When you never let a good crisis go to waste, for sure. We see it too often to not learn from it. So what about the knowledge workers? So in that work within your field, so we talked about the folks that are boots to ground, so to speak, and the plants that are, more physical, perform more physical tasks. So can you give us an example, like knowledge workers? How is their authentication, identity and access management a little different than maybe IT? Or if you just walk us through some of that, because it's still very important, I'm assuming, like, as far as like they still have access to research and things like that. So
sure.
Certainly.
I think the way that you need to think about it, right, is what are the specialized roles that different people in the organization have to have, right? So whether that's somebody in HR or whether that's somebody in your R&D department, what is the information that they actually have access to? How critical is it? How sensitive is it? How confidential is it? And what is the impact if that information would fall into the hands of the wrong people? And that is kind of the context in which we need to wrap our heads around what does role-based access really mean, right? And one of, I think, the biggest things that we all struggle with, at least most people that I've talked to, how do I most efficiently, when somebody gets hired, get them functional with everything that they need to do their job within 4 hours? Like, I would love 4 hours, right? But oftentimes the roles are not obvious. They are not clear with regards to what comes with that role. And then the folks who are approving it are sometimes, not even aware of what they're approving or what they're not approving in those situations. So there's a lot to be said for, building out a true role-based identity model that says, I'm a customer service rep. Here are the 18 things I need access to, and I'm going to get assigned to that customer service role, and voila, it's all going to happen, right? So identity and access management is a huge nut to crack, and it's definitely something that security enables across the board, but we need so much commitment and partnership from our business partners and our constituents, because I'll honestly, I'll never forget when I started at Covanta, I went to one of our field locations, and somebody was, they're like, oh, she's the security girl, right, who's here? And then they were like, can you fix why does it take so long to get everybody to be able to do their job and what they need? And I'm like, look, I hear you, but I can't do that by myself, because you all need to tell me what you do, what they need access to. I can't define that. I'm not the authoritative source for that. I can enable it for you, but I need you to help me define it, right? So getting that level of commitment and buy-in from the key business stakeholders or your global process owners who need to say, yes, a customer service rep needs this, or an attorney needs this, for example. It's a pretty big, piece to chunk off and figure out. So it's extremely, and then making it happen within the constructs and the systems that you have are definitely, another piece of that puzzle that needs to come together, because how does it get provisioned across all the different applications that they need? How does your ERP system actually handle and manage security? Who gets to approve it? Are there segregation of duty issues that come into conflict, depending if you assign different roles that have conflicting transaction capabilities? So, the knowledge worker is different. I think the exposure points are different than when we compare that to, the manufacturing space. But nonetheless, you're going to have people across the board who are going to need elevated permissions. There are, people in HR who are going to have access to all of the payroll data. Well, there's not very many people in your organization that should have that access. So how do you prevent or ensure that somebody doesn't accidentally get that access? And, what are the way in? Are you doing everything through single sign-on? Is there backdoor access in emergency situations, but how do you ensure that that doesn't get abused? Are you monitoring that? And a lot of times as things, are provisioned outside of the enterprise or outside of IT, it's easy to lose sight of some of those things. So the governance model around how you manage that is extremely important, because, it's not only as important when somebody joins the organization, but when somebody is leaving the organization, how do you make sure that all of that information gets, or all of that access gets removed in a timely fashion as well?
You're triggering me. I'm having some triggers right now.
Get some agita.
I don't know if you know, I used to be an auditor. I've been an auditor for a long time. So like everything you just said, I was like, ooh, yeah. Oh man. Oh, what? Role-based what? For what?
Yeah.
Segregation duties what? Least privilege? No, we don't. We're leaving. We have no idea what access they had. That's all very, very challenging. The role-based access, absolutely. I think that's pretty standard, right? Role-based access, least privilege.
I think it's standard from a conceptual perspective. I think it's extremely difficult to implement.
Yeah. Is that something you did within your program at your former position?
I would say at one of the three that I've been at, we had a pretty good handle on it, but it's still, I think what happens with some of the systems, the role definition becomes so complex and then turns into this vague morass of transactions that somebody has the ability to conduct. And then it just, if you look at SAP, the role definitions and the structure are just, extremely complex.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you, and you want somebody from the business to own it, but then they almost have to become transaction experts within SAP. And that's why oftentimes people go, let the IT folks deal with that. But honestly, that's not where our responsibility lies. It should be in, enabling and granting as opposed to authorizing.
Absolutely. We're accountable, but not responsible. We can't. I'm actually going through something similar right now, and it would be much easier to just say, give them all the access, but, that definition is critical. I think that's a great key takeaway here, for our audience, whether they're building a program or, continuously maturing it. Like, we never can stop with access control, identity and access management, whatever you want, auditing, reviewing who has privileges and whatnot, and just making sure everything still makes sense. So let me ask you about you mentioned barcode scanners. Again, I don't know anything about manufacturing, but like that's for the folks that are within the plants and, working on the floor. So that's one tool that they're using, or one technology. Like, are there others that they're using, and how does that handle from like a identity security? Is it kind of like just checking in and out, or is there like special controls on the actual devices?
I think it depends, right, on the maturity of the organization, right? But if you think about it, a lot of times, if you're just think about it in the simplest form from an inventory control perspective, if you're going to the warehouse to take out, 2 liters of a product that's required to make a chemical, how are you regulating how that inventory is actually being managed, right? So do you want them to have to go to the keyboard, or do you want them to scan the barcode on the shelf that says, okay, I'm taking out, 2 products and it decrements the inventory and it's complete. So, that is one element to it. But even if there's so many different types of equipment depending upon your manufacturing with regards to what is the temperature, right? Are we needing to record the temperatures? What about changes that need to be logged in a laboratory notebook as a result of, activities that are going on? Or if you're sitting in a control room and watching all of the cameras that are showing you part of the business process that's happening in the plant, how are you recording and tracking the different events that are going on? So, is there a valve that isn't tuned properly, or is there something going on this camera where maybe there's a fire that has started as a result of a business process? So how am I tracking that? Or if you think about things from a pipeline perspective, how is the product going through the pipeline? Is it stuck someplace? So a lot of that is, built with the camera devices that are monitoring the activity, who has the ability to see that, who has access in the control room to be able to manage or change those settings to make flow rates go up or down, who has the ability to press an emergency stop button, and what are the controls that are required as a result of that. Do you have to key in something that says I am who I say I am, as a part of that? So, it's pervasive in the industry. A lot of IoT type devices that are out there, sensors that are tracking things on different pieces of equipment that are on the manufacturing floor. How are we discovering anomalies that are going on, and what are we doing about those? So it's all kinds of different stuff that can be used, not just the computer.
That sounds like fun. Can I come work with you?
Sure, come on over.
Yeah, no, I think that's all fascinating because I just feel like it's cyber, but it's not. It's like completely different,
That's
and
completely. Yeah,
completely
it's,
different.
a lot of times, people will, talk about healthcare as well, right? So in Philly, healthcare is a big industry. Not as much manufacturing goes on in the Philadelphia area, but, healthcare is the same way. The difference there is that it's usually attached to a person, right? So loss of life is even, more real from a risk perspective, right? And how you want to make sure that those sensors that are, in some cases, implanted in a human being are not compromised as well. So definitely not manufacturing, but similar impact, right? Depending upon, the abuse and misuse of technology. As much as it can be used for good, there's always an element of bad.
Yes, and I do know about healthcare, and that is very scary. So if it's
Mm-hmm.
anything like healthcare, it's very scary,
Mm-hmm.
very serious. The Internet of Things in hospitals, the technology, X-ray machines, even like heart pacers or
Yeah.
monitors, like all of that. It's very critical. That's the understatement. So yeah,
Yeah.
I see the similarities there as well. Um, cool. Well, I think we're coming on time. I gotta give you a shout out though. So Tammy is one of the top 25 CISOs of women we admire. Congratulations. That's very exciting. I was so
Thank you,
happy when I saw
Jess.
you post that. You totally deserve
Mm.
it. I know we just got to be friends and buddies and colleagues and stuff, but I love to see all your posts. You are out there in the streets sharing a good word about cyber, all of your experience. A great leader, woman in cyber.
Thank
Philly's
you.
really great. Lucky to have you, and thank you for embracing me on the tech scene. You guys have been awesome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's been great. It's like you said, we haven't known each other that long, but I think, Philly's a great community to be a part of, specifically in cyber. And, the beauty of our industry is that we are all in this together and we're, fighting the same things. So the more that we can benefit from each other's lessons and experiences, positive or negative, definitely is beneficial to the greater good. So.
Absolutely. And I know that you feel that wholeheartedly. So thank you. Are you going to B-Sides Philly?
I am not going to B-Sides Philly. I don't remember why, but I know I cannot be there. So I
Okay.
apologize.
Well,
So,
maybe Entra. I'm sure I'll see you by the end of the
oh,
year.
yeah, absolutely. There will definitely be opportunity, I'm sure. So, but
Yes, yes. Well, I like to ask all my guests, Tammy, what advice would you give 18-year-old Tammy?
oh, 18-year-old Tammy. So I would say, honestly, never say no to an opportunity because you never know where it's going to take you. If it's out of your comfort zone, don't be afraid to take the risk and see what could happen. I would have never said 10 years ago that I was going to be a 3 times over CISO, as respected as I am in this industry. But it's been an amazing journey. And had I not taken the opportunity, it would have never happened. So don't be afraid to go outside of your comfort zone and take some risks.
True story there. And you're so like down to earth too. Somebody told me the other day that I don't look like a CISO, and I was like, well, what does the CISO look like?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Like, what does the CISO look like? But I guess sometimes you think about maybe a man, but
Mhm.
like maybe more stern or curt or whatever, not approach. I don't know, but like you're very. You've always had whenever we're around, you have a great demeanor. You're very approachable. Sharing your knowledge, like everything you just said. So,
Mhm.
definitely appreciate you in the space, and thank you for your time here, coming on the show. Have a great weekend at your daughter's wedding.
Thank
Congratulations
you.
again.
Thank you.
That's
Yeah.
exciting.
Exciting times ahead. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure how I have a daughter old enough to be
I
getting
was
married,
gonna
but
ask
it's
that.
okay.
Yeah. We don't have to talk about that one, but
No, let's not. Let's
yeah,
not.
when you said that though, I was like, really? Okay, all right. Well,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Mama
So
looks
crazy.
good. All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
So,
thank you, and we'll talk again soon. I'll see you before the end of the year. And excuse me. Take care. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. We want to say a special thank you to our sponsors, Savient, Liminal, and CyberArk. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast and you will receive a new story each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you next week for a new episode.